Greetings, Paul Deeds here. I've always struggled with expectations. I have a pretty good idea of how I think people should act, and they seldom do. I have a pretty low tolerance for the inconsiderate. That's probably the main reason I don't like large groups of people, because I don't like the way a lot of people act. I have expectations of how I think people should act, and like I said, they seldom do. Keep me away from big crowds, keep me away from movie theaters. Don't make me drive too much. Drivers are terrible about being inconsiderate. I expect when people are out there driving, they be considerate of other people on the road, and you know as well as I do, they're not. Many of them are not. No theaters, no large groups, no bars. You get the idea. And we've all experienced disappointment because of our expectations. We have a certain expectation in mind, and when it's not met, it's disappointing. And the more excited I get about something, the higher my hopes are, the higher my expectations are, the greater my disappointment when that expectation is not met. A good example is this YouTube channel that I started here a while back. I started it on my birthday back at the end of May and didn't tell anybody about it. Kathy knew about it, of course, but I didn't tell anybody else about it. And then after I'd had it up for 3 months or so, I made an announcement to friends and relatives and whatnot on Facebook. The response was less than stellar from friends and relatives. I think I had 11 responses, 3 comments, and no subscribers. So, it's funny, really. Like I've said many times, I don't care about being monetized, and I don't have any. I shouldn't say I don't have high expectations from the channel. I have some expectations, but I'm not looking for thousands of subscribers and a paycheck. I never had that on my mind. But when you're excited about something and you tell your friends about it, you'd like for them to be excited about it too. It doesn't always happen, as you well know, I'm sure. I was warned about that. When I started the channel, was doing my research and everything, any number of people would tell you, don't count on your friends and family, which is kind of funny to me. I don't get it, but there's a lot of things I don't get. When I talk about expectations, I tend to think of expectations of other people. That's not always the case, but when I talk about expectations, that's what I'm thinking about, mostly people. And people's reactions are often less than we expected. I'm sure you've experienced the same thing. You're expecting a certain reaction or a certain response, and it doesn't happen. Or it happens to a lesser degree than you had in mind. I think we tend to expect people to react the way that we would react, and they don't. And we really shouldn't expect people to react the way that we would react, because everybody has a different outlook on things. They're coming from a different place, so how can you expect them to react the same as you? That doesn't seem reasonable. If you stop and think about it, it doesn't stop you from being disappointed, but if you think about it, it's reasonable. Something I could learn to do better is to act and to give without the expectation of receiving anything, without the expectation of a particular reaction. Just act and do right, and don't have high expectations of how people will react to it. If I know I'm doing the right thing, then how people react to it is up to them. We could learn to give without the expectation of receiving anything in return, including a reaction. That's not always easy. I think it's human nature to expect a response to something. If we learn to give without the expectation of receiving, give for the sake of giving. Kind of a funny story from my past. When I was a kid at home, my mother had a Christmas card book, and she would keep track. It had all the addresses of people that she sent Christmas cards to and everything. And she would keep track of the Christmas cards that she sent every year, keep track of who sent cards in return. She'd make a little check when she sent a card, and she'd put a cross through it when she received one in return. And the next year, the ones that she didn't receive cards from didn't get a card the next year. Is that the right way to do it? Probably not. It's understandable, I guess, to some extent. Oh, if you're not going to give me a card, I'm not giving you a card. It seems kind of childish, but it's the way it is sometimes. We all can be childish from time to time. I've been guilty of that myself. Kathy and I make our own Christmas cards. We've been doing it for a number of years. Mostly they're humorous cards. People seem to enjoy them, and we enjoy making them, so that's really the main thing. And I have to admit, we've taken people off our Christmas card list for different reasons, various reasons, out of touch, and we never hear from them. But we kind of got past that, and we add more names than we remove these days because we enjoy doing it. People seem to enjoy getting them, so that's enough. We don't need to receive anything in return. We enjoy doing it just for its own sake. Another story about my mother, and I hope you're not getting the impression that my mother was some kind of an ogre or something. She wasn't. She was a pretty good lady. She had her odd ways, like we all do. But I've got another story about her, that she would always get aggravated with the grandkids for not acknowledging gifts. And she was very good about gifts, cards and gifts, and she'd send a little money or a little gift or some kind. And often the grandkids would not respond, would not even acknowledge. And she would get kind of aggravated about that. And I always told her, quit sending. If you need the response for sending the gift, quit sending. And that would be perfectly legitimate, I think. Of course, she never did. She kept giving, kept griping. Just one of those human nature things, I think. I don't know. It's not unreasonable to expect a thank you when you do something for somebody. Kids are not as good about that as they should be. Is that the parents' fault? I don't know. High expectations are pretty similar to optimism in my book. I kind of feel the same way about them. I don't want to lower my expectations on some things. I don't want to lose my optimism. I'm basically an optimistic person. I don't want to give that up just because it might produce some disappointment. What I probably should do is learn to handle the disappointment better. And, there are things that you should have high expectations for. People should do what they say. Tradespeople should show up when they said they're going to be there. I don't think that's unreasonable. That's a reasonable expectation. People should be considerate of each other. I don't think that's an unreasonable expectation either. We should demand the best from our teachers, from our police, from our doctors. That doesn't seem unreasonable to me. We should have high expectations of our politicians too. I know that seems kind of ridiculous because we have such low expectations of our politicians. I think sometimes the bad reputation that people have, not just politicians, but tradespeople always come to mind. They're not dependable. They don't show up when they should. On the large part, there are some that are dependable. The majority, I would say, are questionable. And why is that? Because we accept it. If we didn't accept that behavior would change. If the guy that's always late didn't get any business, he'd start showing up on time. So can we blame ourselves for that one? Maybe. And when I say show up on time, I know that there are always circumstances that will make a person late, and trades are famous for that. But how many of them don't bother to call? They could call. I'm being hard on the tradespeople here. I'm not picking on them in particular. It's just our expectations of them are lower, and I don't think they should be. That's all. So I think the bottom line really is having reasonable expectations. Sometimes those reasonable expectations will be high and sometimes they'll be lower. Part of the situation for younger people these days is that their expectations are too high. They're not reasonable expectations. A lot of young people want to start higher on the ladder than is reasonable. I think that the college degree that they spent 4 years getting should put them higher on the ladder starting, and it's not reasonable in the real world. And that's just my opinion. You could disagree, that's fine. But I think sometimes their expectations starting out are higher than they should be. They sometimes have a higher opinion of their value in the marketplace. Marketplace sometimes doesn't care. The marketplace will determine your value. So like I say, I think probably the bottom line is to make our expectations reasonable and then stick to them. So maybe we shouldn't lower our expectations. Maybe we should just make sure that our expectations are reasonable for the situation. And understand that we're still going to be disappointed from time to time when our expectations are not met, because that's inevitable. Whether your expectations are reasonable or not, you're going to be disappointed from time to time. So I think I'll keep my reasonably high expectations and optimism and work on accepting the fact that there is going to be some disappointment along the way, and also work on keeping my disappointment from becoming resentment. Peace and joy and reasonableness.